Welcome to African Tales by Philip. Tonight's story is one you won't forget. Imagine a little girl, robbed of her parents, forced into servitude, and treated worse than a stranger in her own family's home. But what happens when hidden truths rise from the shadows, and karma comes knocking at the very door of those who wronged her? Stay with me, because what unfolds is a journey of tears, betrayal, and ultimate triumph that will leave you speechless. Wobbling with each step, her thin arms trembling under the strain. She was only 16, but years of harsh labor had aged her eyes far beyond her years. Her aunt, Madame Alama, stood at the doorway with her hands on her hips, her eyes cold and sharp like the blade of a knife. "Lazy girl," Alama barked. "Is this the time people fetch water? Do you think food cooks itself in this house? Drop it there and hurry to the firewood. Useless child." Adiz lowered the basin carefully, fighting to hold back tears. She had been living with her aunt since her parents died in a car accident 6 years ago. At first, Alama pretended to care. But soon, the mask fell, and her true colors showed. Adiz was not treated like family. She was treated like a servant, like a burden, like someone undeserving of love. In the evenings, when the village children gathered in the square to play, Adiz was locked inside, scrubbing the soot-blackened pots until her fingers bled. While others sat at the table, eating steaming jollof rice and fried plantain, she ate the burnt scraps thrown into a broken calabash behind the kitchen. Her cousins mocked her constantly. "Slave girl," shouted Chaik, the eldest son, as he watched her balance firewood on her head. "Look at you, always smelling of smoke." "Maybe one day," sneered Ngozi, the daughter, "someone will marry you just to wash his feet." Their laughter cut deeper than any whip. Adiz swallowed her pain, her eyes burning but her lips sealed. She had learned that crying in front of them only gave them more reason to taunt her. One evening, as she knelt by the hearth blowing into dying flames, Olama stormed into the kitchen. "Why is this fire still weak? Are you trying to waste my kerosene, eh? I should flog the laziness out of your bones." Before Adiz could explain, Olama's hand struck her across the cheek. The sting spread like wildfire across her face. She bit her lip, holding back a scream. Her aunt's slaps were familiar, almost routine. Still, they cut into her spirit, each one reminding her of her worthlessness in this house. That night, Adiz crept outside, away from the sharp eyes of her aunt and the mocking voices of her cousins. She sat beneath the old mango tree at the edge of the compound, staring at the sky. The stars twinkled above, free and untouchable. She whispered to herself, "Is this all my life will be? Scrubbing pots? Carrying water? Being called a slave in my own family?" She hugged her knees tightly, her heart heavy. She thought of her parents, kind faces she barely remembered, voices that seemed like fading echoes. If they were alive, would they let her live like this? From the window, Chaik's laughter echoed. He and Ngozi were playing Ludo, their plates of meat pies still steaming. Adiz turned away, her stomach growling. Hunger had become her closest companion, always beside her, gnawing quietly. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Adiz's body carried the scars of endless chores, bruises from heavy loads, cuts from sharp firewood, calluses from scrubbing. But it was her soul that carried the heaviest weight, the weight of rejection, of never being wanted, of being invisible. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope refused to die. It was faint, almost drowned by pain, but it remained. Perhaps it was in her blood. Perhaps it was the stubbornness of destiny. One Sunday morning, while her cousins dressed in their best lace outfits for church, Adiz was ordered to stay behind and wash their clothes. She knelt by the river, scrubbing until her fingers turned white, her tears mixing with the water. A woman passing by stopped and watched her. "My child," the woman said softly, "you work too hard for someone so young. Who do you live with?" Adiz looked up, startled. No one ever asked her such a question. She opened her mouth to answer, but fear gripped her. If her aunt heard she had been speaking to strangers, she would be beaten again. She lowered her eyes and kept scrubbing. The woman sighed and walked away, but her words lingered in Adiz's heart. "I work too hard. That evening, Olama returned from church, her face stern. "Did you finish the washing?" "Yes, Auntie," Adiz whispered. "But tomorrow, you must wake before dawn. My friend is visiting, and I don't want her to see you sitting idle. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Auntie." As Olama walked away, Adiz's eyes welled up again. But this time, she made a silent vow beneath her breath. One day I will be free from this house. And when that day comes, I will never return. Little did she know, destiny was already setting its pieces in motion. What was hidden from her eyes would soon come to light, a secret that would break her chains forever. The night air in Agbid village was cool, filled with the distant hum of crickets and the occasional barking of dogs. Inside the small mud house, the family slept soundly on soft mats, their bellies full from the feast Olama had cooked after church. But Adiz lay awake on her thin raffia mat in the corner of the kitchen. The only warmth she had was from the fading embers of the cooking fire. She turned from side to side, her stomach empty, her throat dry. Hunger gnawed at her, but it was not as sharp as the ache in her heart. When she was sure everyone was asleep, she pressed her face into her pillow and wept quietly. She had mastered the art of silent crying. The tears slid down her cheeks like rain, soaking into the mat, but her sobs were trapped inside her chest. If anyone heard, especially her aunt, punishment would follow. Her whispered words broke into the silence. "God, why me? Why did you let my parents leave me so soon? Am I not your child too?" The flicker of the lamp above her head danced against the cracked wall, casting shadows that seemed to answer her. In those shadows, she often imagined her parents watching over her, whispering promises she could not yet hear. Her days were cruel, but her nights were lonelier. She longed for someone, anyone, to sit beside her and remind her that she mattered. But no one came. Her cousins despised her, her aunt used her, and the villagers passed her by like she was invisible. And yet, inside, she carried dreams she dared not speak aloud. She dreamed of walking freely in beautiful clothes, of learning in school, of sitting in a big house where no one could order her around. She dreamed of love, of belonging, of a day when her name would no longer be spoken with scorn. One particular night, as the moonlight streamed through the small window, Adiz stared at the stars. She remembered her vow under the mango tree. "One day, I will be free." The words echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. The following morning, her aunt's voice shattered the fragile peace. "Wake up, lazy girl. Sweep the compound before the sun rises." Adiz rose quickly, her bones aching, and went about her chores. But something inside her had shifted. Though she bent her back to sweep, her mind lifted itself to those faraway dreams. Though she scrubbed her cousin's dirty shoes, her spirit whispered of freedom. By midday, after hours of cooking and washing, Olama ordered Adiz to fetch palm oil from the old storeroom at the back of the compound. The storeroom was rarely used. It was filled with dusty boxes, broken stools, and spider webs. Adiz hated going there. It was dark, and the air smelled of mold and secrets. She pushed the creaking wooden door open, her heart racing. She found the clay pot of palm oil quickly enough, but as she turned to leave, her eyes caught the corner of an old wooden trunk hidden under a torn mat. Something tugged at her spirit. She set down the oil and knelt by the trunk. The lock was rusty, and the wood was brittle. With trembling hands, she pulled at it. The latch gave way with a snap, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Inside were folded clothes, old photographs, and a small leather-bound book. Adiz's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen these items before. She picked up one of the photographs and wiped it clean with her sleeve. Her hands shook. It was a picture of her mother. Tears blurred her vision. She had so few memories, so few reminders. And here, hidden in her aunt's storeroom, were pieces of her parents' past. Why were they locked away? Why had she never been shown them? Her eyes fell on the leather-bound book. Carefully she opened it. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting delicate and neat. It was her father's journal. She skimmed the first lines. "For my beloved daughter, if you ever read this, know that you are destined for greatness. The world may try to break you, but your blood carries strength. Never forget who you are." Her breath hitched. She pressed the book to her chest, her heart pounding wildly. But before she could read further, she heard footsteps approaching. Panicked, she shoved the book back into the trunk, replaced the mat, and grabbed the pot of palm oil. Her aunt entered the storeroom, eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here so long?" Adi's voice trembled. I was looking for the oil, Auntie." "Hm. You're always wasting time." Olama snatched the oil from her and walked out. Adiz followed, her hands shaking. She could still feel the weight of her father's words pressing against her heart. That night, as she lay on her raffia mat, she stared at the stars again. But now, she carried a secret. She was not just a servant girl, not just her aunt's punching bag. She was her father's daughter. She was destined for more. And though her aunt knew nothing of what Adiz had seen, she had unknowingly pushed her niece one step closer to freedom. And though her aunt knew nothing of what Adiz had seen, she had unknowingly pushed her niece one step closer to freedom. Freedom tasted like dust and old paper. The next afternoon, while Olama and the children were at the market, Adiz slipped back into the storeroom. She closed the door softly, heart thudding against her ribs. The trunk sat there like a sleeping animal. She pulled off the torn mat, lifted the lid, and cradled the leather-bound journal in her hands. She opened to the page where she'd stopped. "If this reaches you, my Adiz, look for my friend, Kenechukwu Adigwe. He promised me that if anything ever happened, he would help you. Inside this trunk is a small envelope with his card and a letter he wrote before we moved. Keep them safe." Her hands trembled. She dug beneath folded wrappers and came up with a brown envelope sealed with brittle gum. Inside lay a business card. K.C. Adigwe, founder, Adigwe Holdings and Foundation, and a neatly folded letter. She unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were sharp. "Chinedu, I meant what I said. If fate turns unkind, bring your daughter to me. I owe you more than money. You saved my life before I knew it needed saving. I will not forget." Adiz's breath snagged. Her father had worked as a driver for a man powerful enough to have letterheads and a foundation, a promise to care for her. All these years, the key to her destiny had been rotting in a storeroom. The latch rattled. Adiz shoved the letter into her wrapper just as the door swung open. Olama's silhouette cut across the light. "What are you doing here again?" her aunt snapped, stepping inside. Her gaze darted to the open trunk. "You thief." I only came for palm oil," Adiz stammered, hands behind her back. Olama strode forward, slammed the trunk shut, and seized Adiz by the arm. "So this is where you hide to steal my things. Have you lost your mind?" "I didn't take anything," Adiz whispered, pulse roaring in her ears. The letter felt like hot coal against her skin. "On your knees." Adiz sank to the dusty floor. The slap came swift, then another. By the time it ended, her cheek burned and her ears rang. "From today," Olama hissed, "you don't enter here again. And if I catch you near this place, I will throw you out like the stray you are." She stormed out, locking the storeroom with a rusty padlock. Alone in the yard, Adiz steadied her breath and slipped the letter deeper into her wrapper. She would hide it under her mat tonight. She would memorize the name, Kenechukwu Adigwe. She would hold fast to it like a rope over a raging river. That night, while the house slept, she lit a stub of candle and copied the address from the business card onto a scrap of paper. It was a world away, a Nugu city. She had never left Ogbede. But a line from her father's journal pulsed in her mind, "Never forget who you are." "Tomorrow," she whispered to her pillow, "I will find a way to reach him." The cock crowed at dawn. Before the sun could climb, fate shoved her toward the next test. And it began with a lie. Ngozi's gold-colored bangle, cheap and flaking, went missing. Chike, smirking, swore he saw Adiz in the room. By evening, Olama was a storm. "You shameless girl," she spat, dragging Adiz into the sitting room. "You steal jewelry now? In my own house?" "I didn't take it," Adiz cried. "I've never." "Search her," Ngozi said, eyes glittering. They turned out her pockets, thread, a bent pin, a folded scrap of paper, the address. Chike snatched it and read aloud, mocking the big city words. "What is this?" Olama demanded. Adiz's mouth went dry. "This for work." I was only copying. A slap cut the sentence. You think you can run away? After eating my food and using my roof? Alama's voice rose. Get out. Tonight. Before you steal the roof itself. Andy, please. It's late. Out. They shoved her to the yard, tossed her nylon bag after her, 2 dresses, a worn scarf, a bar of cheap soap. The gate clanged shut. The moon stared down, cold and silver. Adiz stood there trembling, then tied her wrapper tight and lifted her chin. She tucked the precious letter deep into her blouse. She would not sleep beneath this gate. She walked. Past the mango tree where she'd once vowed freedom, past the sleeping goats, past the lone kiosk with its sodas winking in moonlight. Her feet found the laterite path toward the junction where buses passed at dawn. At the road's edge, she curled against a broken milestone, hugged her bag, and let tears come. For a moment the fear was larger than the sky. Then she wiped her face. Enugu, she whispered to the wind. Tomorrow. A rooster crowed somewhere. The night thinned into gray. At first light, an old minibus coughed toward the junction, conductor hanging from the door, calling, Nsukka, Enugu, Nsukka, Enugu. Adiz stood, tightened her scarf, and stepped forward, heart hammering. She had no fare. But she had her father's letter. She had his name on her tongue. Please, she said to the driver, voice steadying on courage, I need to get to Enugu. I can work to pay. The conductor eyed her suspiciously. Auntie, we are not charity. From the back seat, a soft voice said, Let her ride. I'll cover it. Adiz turned. A woman with kind eyes and a baby strapped to her back gave a small nod. Sit, my dear. Gratitude blurred the world. Adiz climbed in, clutching her bag to her chest as the minibus lurched onto the highway. The road unfurled before her like a question. Somewhere beyond those hills lay the man who could change everything. Somewhere beyond lay the answer to a promise written long ago. Halfway to Nsukka, the bus rounded a curve and braked hard. A black SUV had swerved and stalled, hazard lights blinking. The driver stood outside, calling someone. Rain began in fat, impatient drops. The conductor cursed. Today. But to Adiz it felt like the hand of destiny tapping gently. She didn't yet know that the man in that SUV was the thread connecting her father's last hope to her first dawn of freedom. The minibus pulled around and rattled on, rain chasing it toward Enugu. By the time they reached the city's hem, water hammered the roof like 1,000 small fists. The woman who'd paid her fare squeezed Adiz's hand. Where are you going? The man my father knew, Adiz said, voice small. Then God go before you, the woman whispered. The bus groaned to a stop at the park. Adiz stepped into the wet, lifted her face to the rain, and breathed. Adigwe Holdings and Foundation, she read from the card. Ogwe Road. She started walking. And the storm drove her, chapter to chapter, into her turning point. By afternoon the rain had wrung the city clean. Adiz reached the tall gate with the brass plaque, Adigwe Holdings and Foundation. The guards' green uniforms flashed under dripping bougainvillea. She smoothed her dress and approached. Please. I need to see Mr. Kenechukwu Adigwe. The first guard looked her up and down. Mud-streaked slippers. Nylon bag. Hopeful eyes. You have appointment? I have a letter from my father. He worked for him. Long ago. Many people say that, the guard said, but not unkindly. A second guard, older, peered at the card she held and the water-warped envelope she drew from her blouse. His face shifted. Wait here. Minutes stretched. The gatehouse phone crackled. The older guard returned. Follow me. Don't look left or right. They walked along a neat drive to a reception hall that smelled faintly of rain and polished wood. A woman at the desk, name tag reading Igioma, took the letter and card, glanced at Adiz's face, and made another call. A door opened. A man stepped out, early 50s, trim, with gentle eyes that had seen a lot of people and remembered many of them. His voice was quiet. Who brings Chinedu's handwriting into my house after so many years? Adiz's throat tightened. I am his daughter. Adiz. Something in his face broke and healed at the same time. Come. He led her into a sunlit office, walls lined with photographs, groundbreakings, scholarships awarded, a younger Mr. Adigwe beside a smiling driver. He touched the frame. "Your father." Tears surged. She nodded. He sat, unfolded the letter, and read it in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Your father saved my little boy from a runaway truck on a bad road near Abakba. He pulled him clear and took the hit himself, smashed his knee. I told him I owed him everything. We spoke many times about you. He wanted you educated." Adi's hands shook. After my parents died, I went to my aunt. Did things. I found your letter yesterday. She threw me out last night." Mr. Adigwe's mouth hardened. He pressed the intercom. "Ijeoma, please call legal. Ask Mrs. Adebayo to join us with the historical files of the trust accounts from 20." He paused, searching memory, 2016 to 2020. "And have someone bring food." He turned back to Adiz. "Did your aunt ever mention receiving money?" "No, sir." Food arrived, jollof, plantain, a warm meat pie. Adiz ate slowly as if afraid the plate would be snatched. The lawyer, a calm woman with sharp intelligence, came in with a file box. "Sir," she said, "we reviewed disbursements. A stipend was set aside annually for Adiz's schooling as agreed. All payments were collected and signed for by a guardian, one Mrs. Olama Nwok." The room tilted. "She forged and collected?" Mr. Adigwe asked, voice low. Mrs. Adebayo nodded. "Signatures match her ID. Funds diverted. We have addresses, receipts, dates." Adiz stared at her hands. A fist of old pain unclenched into something fierce and clear. "We will handle this properly," the lawyer said. "If you want police, we involve police. If you want restitution and guardianship transfer, we file immediately." "I want the girl safe and in school," Mr. Adigwe said. He looked at Adiz. "But first, I want you to rest. This house has a guest room. You will sleep. Tomorrow we will begin." "Sir," Adiz whispered, tears spilling, "thank you." He smiled softly. "Your father asked me to stand for him. I am merely obeying a promise." That night, under a clean white sheet, Adiz lay awake again, but the ache in her chest had been replaced by a trembling, impossible hope. She didn't know that in the morning, the path would split, justice on one side, destiny on the other. And she would walk both. Morning brought a sky rinsed blue. In the conference room, files lay open like truths that could no longer be folded away. "We'll petition the court for immediate protective custody and educational guardianship," said Mrs. Adebayo. "We'll also commence proceedings for recovery of misappropriated funds." "I want to be there," Adiz said quietly. Her voice was steadier than the day before. "When she answers for it." "You will be," the lawyer replied. By noon they drove to Ogbede, not in a convoy of power, but in a simple SUV. As they turned into the familiar lane, neighbors peeked. Children paused their game. The mango tree stood witness. At the gate, Chaik swung it open, mouth falling when he saw who stood beside Adiz. Olama stepped out, wrapper hastily tied, pride arranged on her face. "Ah, visitors. How can I help?" She saw Adiz and her expression curdled. "You again?" Mr. Adigwe's tone was courteous but firm. "Good afternoon, madam. I am Kenechukwu Adigwe. Years ago, I established a trust for this child's education. Our records show you received and signed for funds in her name. We are here to clarify matters." Color drained from her cheeks. I don't know what you are talking about." The lawyer opened a folder, slid copies of receipts forward. "These are your signatures. This is your ID. We have the bank's CCTV of at least one collection." Neighbor murmurs gathered like storm clouds along the fence. Olama's eyes darted. It was small. "He used it for food. We housed her, For food while she ate scraps?" Adiz's voice cut through, quiet and sharp. "While I slept on the kitchen floor and washed your clothes by the river? You called me thief and yet—" Silence swallowed the yard. "I will not argue here," the lawyer said. "Madam, you will receive a formal summons. Today, we are taking custody of Adiz's documents and belongings, and we advise you to prepare for court." As they turned to go, Ngozi muttered, Who even are you now? Adiz met her eyes without flinching. Someone my father knew I could be. Back in the car, she exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding for 6 years. In the days that followed, things moved with the clean precision of justice finally awakened. A judge, brisk and firm, granted temporary guardianship to the Adigwe Foundation, pending full investigation. Evidence stacked. Accounts opened like rotten fruit. Yet amidst the legal bustle, life also rushed in. A tutor evaluated Adiz. She was bright, hungry for knowledge. A guidance counselor asked what she liked. Numbers, she said, surprising herself. And stories. The way both can carry truth. We'll enroll you in a bridge program, the counselor smiled. Then school. The world is larger than the rooms you were kept in. One evening, in the quiet of the guest room, Adiz opened her father's journal again. Near the end, a line she'd missed. When you are tempted to hate, remember, freedom is not full if your heart remains in chains. She closed the book gently. The next day, she asked to visit the mango tree one last time. She stood under its broad leaves, the yard empty, the house quiet in the late afternoon heat. She spoke softly, not to the compound, not to the past, but to the girl who had survived it. We are leaving. From there, her life did what the river does when the dam finally breaks. It ran. Time began to stretch differently, measured not by chores and insults but by classes, discoveries, and small dignities that felt enormous. Shoes that fit. A bed of her own. A door that locked from the inside. Adiz learned fast. Math problems that had once been distant mountains became climbable hills. She devoured books, asked questions, stayed after class. Teachers smiled at her drive. The foundation sponsored her fees, materials, and a mentorship program that paired her with women leaders in finance and social enterprise. On weekends, she visited the foundation's community center. The first time she saw the rows of girls learning to code, to sew, to speak boldly, something in her chest went warm and wide. Can I help? She asked the program lead. You can, came the answer. Start with the younger ones. Read to them. Listen. She listened, to stories like hers, to girls who had become small to fit into other people's houses. She taught them to keep a notebook, to name their dreams, to treat their names with respect when the world did not. Months flicked past like pages. On a breezy morning, Mr. Adigwe called her to his office. Your midterm results, he said, handing her a sheet. She scanned, breath catching. High marks. Higher than she dared say aloud. He grinned. You built this. Your father would be dancing. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. I did what was promised, he replied. The rest has been you. When scholarship applications opened, the foundation nominated her for a summer program in Lagos focused on financial literacy and social entrepreneurship. There, while learning about budgeting and microloans, she thought of the girls at the center who sold handmade soaps to pay for notebooks, of the women in Ogbede who needed small capital to breathe. A plan formed. A fund for small beginnings. She drafted it with careful numbers and kinder language. She named it First Spark. At the pitch day, her hands shook but her voice didn't. She told her story without spectacle, only truth, how a little trust, honored, could unlock a life. Judges leaned forward. When she finished, the room rose to their feet. They awarded her seed money and mentorship. The foundation matched it. Overnight, she was no longer only a beneficiary, she was a builder. News traveled. A local radio station invited her to share the First Spark story. She accepted, not for fame, but to place a light in the windows of girls who might be walking night roads with nylon bags of clothes and letters tucked into blouses. And because stories keep their own promises, fate circled back. One afternoon, as she left the station, a familiar voice called her name. Ngozi. Older by worry, thinner by consequence. She stood on the curb, twisting her hands. I heard you on radio, she said, eyes shining with things that weren't tears yet. The case? It's bad. They say prison. We have nothing. Old pain stirred like dust. Adiz took a breath. Come, she said at last. Let's talk at the center. They walked in silence. Adiz remembered the journal line about chains. Freedom would demand something of her now. At the center, over tea, she listened. The cousins were paying a price too, different, but real. She didn't excuse. She didn't forget. But she wrote down what they needed: counseling, job referrals, a way back to steady ground. Restitution must still be paid, she said gently. But punishment alone cannot feed a soul. Ngozi nodded, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry. I know, Adiz said. Be better. That night, she told Mr. Adigwe what she had decided. He nodded, proud. Justice and mercy are not enemies, he said. Your father would recognize this path. And so the girl who had scrubbed pots in shadows now lit lamps in the lives of others. Her story was not a fairy tale. It was better, it was true. The court date arrived under a serious sky. In the box, Olama looked smaller than Adiz remembered, as if the scaffolding of pride had been stripped away. Charges were read: fraud, forgery, misappropriation of funds intended for a minor's welfare. Guilty. Restitution ordered, a custodial sentence softened by community service at a shelter the foundation supported. The judge, stern but not cruel, added mandatory counseling. Outside, journalists clustered. Microphones angled. A reporter asked, Miss Adiz, do you have anything to say to the woman who mistreated you? She paused. Cameras hummed. Somewhere, her father's handwriting glowed in memory. I hope she learns, Adiz said simply. I learned too, that hate is a second prison. I choose not to live there. The clip traveled far. Not because it was loud, but because it was steady. Months turned to a year. First Spark funded dozens of women with tiny loans that made big differences. Market umbrellas, grinding machines, seed for soap businesses and beadwork. Adiz finished her bridge program, entered school proper, balanced studies with the foundation work like a dancer who'd learned her steps the hard way. On a warm evening, the center held a celebration. Part graduation, part Thanksgiving, part stubborn joy. Children ran between rows of plastic chairs. Drummers began softly. The air smelled like puff-puff and clean hope. Mr. Adigwe called Adiz to the small stage. There is a line in a letter, he said, voice thick. A promise made by a father to a friend. Today we honor the promise and the child who turned it into a living thing. He handed her a framed photo, Chinedu, younger and bright, with a little girl on his lap and a world before them. She held it close, then faced the crowd. I used to think my life was a closed door, she said. But sometimes the door is only heavy. Sometimes it just needs more hands. She looked at the girls in the front row. I won't say it was easy. It wasn't. I won't say I did it alone. I didn't. But I will say this. You are more than the names pain gave you. Keep walking. People who love you will find you on the road. Applause rolled like thunder without rain. After, as the sun slid down gold behind the center's roof, a sleek car pulled up quietly at the curb. A familiar driver stepped out, older now, smiling. Madam, he said, Olga is waiting. In the back seat, Mr. Adigwe patted the place beside him. Come, my daughter. We have one more visit today. They drove to the cemetery where the headstones are patient and the flowers know how to listen. They stood by Chinedu's grave. The wind moved gently through the trees. I kept my promise, Keen said. And I kept my father's words, Adiz whispered. I did not forget who I am. They were quiet for a long time. When they left, dusk had gathered, soft and forgiving. The city lights came on one by one, like people remembering themselves. Back at the center, the girls were dancing. Adiz joined them, laughter rising, feet sure on the floor she'd helped build. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ngozi at the doorway, clapping shyly. Chike hauled a speaker, grinning sheepishly when it crackled to life. The music swelled. A story had closed. Another, wide and unwritten, opened. And the child once called, Slave, moved through the crowd like a leader who knew the cost of light. Because somewhere in a storeroom, long ago, a letter refused to be forgotten. Because a promise kept can change more than one life. Because mercy, when it's brave, sounds like a door unlocking in a house that had been dark for too long. The camera of your voiceover lingers there, on faces upturned, on hands held, on the place where pain did not get the last word. Fade out.